Namaste again. So this is Sri Krishnal Dhital from Sanskriti Farms and Research Center from Nepal. And basically Sanskriti Farms and Research Center, we are more focused on few interventions, food energy and water nexus and interventions, and knowledge sharing, educating and awareing the communities, connecting campus to the communities. So we have many energy leaders here today. So we are in the session 1, that's integrating renewable energy into food and water futures. So I'm moderating this session. I'm very privileged to be here today with Global Future Alliance. So let's begin the session 1, session first, with our first speaker, Dr. Clive Lipchin. Dr. Clive Lipchin serves as the director of Center for Transboundary Water Management, Arava Institute of Environmental Studies in Israel. He is also co-founder and CEO of Laguna Innovation, a company that provides off-grid wastewater treatment and reuse solutions for underserviced and marginalized communities. He is a proud partner and collaborator in the Global Future Alliance. So today, Dr. Lipchin, he will be talking about techno-social solutions for off-grid food energy fuel challenges. So I'd like to kindly invite Dr. Lipchin to the desk.
Thank you, Shree. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here once again. Congratulations to all the amazing organizers and to University of Maryland for hosting us. So, as Shree mentioned, I want to say a few words about some of the food, energy, water nexus projects we're doing in Israel with a lot of support and integration with the Global Futures Alliance. I stole Amy's slide. So we don't have to talk about that because Amy mentioned it, but it's a really important slide, right? Because it gives us the overall comprehensive assessment of why we're doing what we're doing. I work more on the water side of things, and again, what is up here is something obvious to all of us, but it is worth thinking about a little bit, right? Water is this most basic, fundamental resource where everything is dependent upon it. So water is really not just water. The aspect of this that I'm most focused on is the issue of sanitation. So water, sanitation, hygiene. If you look at this graphic, you can see that over 2/3 of the sanitation, the wastewater that is being generated from all manners, domestic use, industry, agricultural runoff, it's not being treated. And so the question is, if it's not being treated, where does it go? Well, of course, it's going into the environment, it's going into surface waters, it's going into groundwaters, and it's a huge issue of contamination, both in terms of upstream and downstream users. Only 30% of the world's sewage, mostly in the developed world, in developed countries. So we heard this morning about some of the wastewater treatment here in Maryland is being treated. So how do we find appropriate ways to increase and improve wastewater treatment across the world? And I like to refer to this quote from the UN, which I think provides a good rationale behind why we're doing this. And it says, in a world where demands for fresh water are continuously growing and where limited water resources are increasingly stressed by over-abstraction, pollution, and climate change, neglecting the opportunities arising from improved wastewater management is nothing less than unthinkable. Quite an extreme point, but I think correct in the context of a circular economy. And so this is sort of a guiding principle for the work that we're trying to carry out in Israel and beyond. This is another slide, thanks to Amy, if she remembers. But this is looking at some of the global reuse of wastewater around the world. So the issue is, for us, it's not just about treating wastewater, But if you think about it, if I'm going to invest time, money, and energy, expertise in treating wastewater and getting that wastewater to a very high quality, especially under conditions of scarcity, why should I just discharge that water back into the environment? The opportunities of recycling that water, specifically into irrigation, is an enormous opportunity. And that, of course, is a great example also of the Nexus approach. But as you can see, again, if we look at the world, wastewater reuse is still something that is only happening in certain areas around the world and in certain countries. As you see on this slide, of course, Israel is one of the world leaders in wastewater treatment and recycling. For example, we collect across the country over 90% of our sewage. We recycle about 80% of that, and all of that goes into agriculture. So Israel is an example of how it can be done at a national level. But the question that we're looking at is, how do you actually do this at a more localized level, especially when you are looking at communities or other entities that are not being serviced by centralized infrastructure? This is one of the biggest challenges. To treat wastewater, you've got to collect it. So you need sewer grids, you need sewer networks. That costs money, that requires expertise. And then you have to bring that sewage to some facility where the sewage can be treated. Those centralized conventional approaches can work, but only under certain socioeconomic contexts. When we look at that 70% of the world that is not treating wastewater, most of that 70% is also off the grid. And so our focus is trying to find an appropriate solution to off the grid communities. And as it says here, 1.3 billion people have limited access to water, sanitation, and electricity. So again, we got that few nexus here. And of course, many of these people live in rural and semi-rural communities where the need for water is not only for domestic or for potable use, but actually more for non-potable use in agriculture and irrigation. And of course, the third point there should be obvious to all of us, that until such communities have access to efficient water, energy, and sanitation, little progress can be made to improve their standards of living and their quality of life. So again, everything is connected, everything is integrated one with the other. So a lot of my work is focused in the Middle East, of course, and these are the populations that I'm looking at. And you can see the challenges, right? If we look at the Palestinian population in the West Bank, around 70% of that population is off the grid, wastewater not being treated. In Jordan, about 30% of the population, and in Israel itself, we're looking at the Bedouin population, which is a distinct ethnic minority in Israel. Roughly 50% of that population is off the grid. So we're trying to find ways in which we can improve the situation for these communities in the Middle East, and from that, see how we can also learn from those experiences in other countries as well. So that brings me to our technology through the company that I've helped to co-found, Lagoon Innovation, which is to provide ecological wastewater treatment and reuse wherever possible through on-site, off-grid systems. I'm not going to go into the technology or the engineering, that's not the purpose of the talk, but there is a technology, we have one, there are others as well, of course, we're not the only ones doing this. But what we're doing specifically within the context of the Global Futures Alliance is to address these issues, not just in a technical way or an engineering way, but to find a way how to make a real difference in communities, in education, and research to action. And so what we have developed, thanks to support of the Global Futures, is an off-grid hub in a Bedouin community where we have different zones showcasing different types of off-grid technologies, not just water, and not just sanitation, but also energy. For example, we have agrivoltaics, biogas generation. And so this is what it looks like. This is the school. The school is completely off the grid. Every day, over 1,000 Bedouin students attend this school. And we are working very closely with the school, with the teachers, with the community, installing and developing these technologies that are not only there to be looked at from a research perspective, but actually provide real value and benefit to the community themselves. So this is why we look at this as an example of a research to action and community-driven capacity building. We have educational programming, we have different types of research for education, for community development, and so on. And here are some pictures. There's Shree, who came to visit Israel about a month or so ago, we had an official launch of the hub with the presence of Israel's President Herzog, who got to see the technology, but more importantly, he got to see how these technologies are impacting the people themselves, for example, meeting with some of the Bedouin students. And then in the time that's left for me, I want to just give another example of a project that we're doing. This is a project where we're working with dairy farmers. This is a Palestinian dairy farm in Jericho. This is the situation of the farm before our intervention. They had no sewer treatment. They were generating, of course, very problematic sewage from the cows directly into the environment. And they were generating these huge amounts of cow manure every day that they didn't know what to do with. So we were approached to try to find a solution both to the liquid waste and the solid waste. So another example of a Nexus approach. We established this system, which is a combination of the Laguna technology system for wastewater treatment with biogas digestion. And this is a great example of the circular economy approach. As you can see here, we are generating biogas. We are using that energy to help offset some of the energy costs for running the dairy farm. We are mitigating and improving the environment by treating the wastewater, reusing that for irrigation. And what's very important in the circular economy approach and this project is the economic benefits as well. We are both saving money in electricity costs and we are generating income in terms of the improved agricultural outputs from the farmers. So this is the slide that we worked on over the last few days to try to summarize everything that's happening in this project. So you can see there that we have the farm generating the wastewater and the cow manure. Wastewater is estimated to be about 25 cubic meters per day of sewage. The farmers are telling us that they're producing, the cows are producing around 5,000 kilograms per day of solid waste. We're putting both of those into the Laguna system, which includes now an integrated biodigester, both for the liquid waste and the solid waste. We have the water side, we have the energy side on the water. We treat that wastewater, we collect it into a reservoir. That treated wastewater goes into irrigation. It's irrigating feed crops for the cows. And that feed crop, of course, is then going into back into the dairy farm. We're estimating about 137,000 kilograms of crops that we can produce for feed for the cows. On the energy side, we're sending the biogas to a boiler. It's collected in a balloon, of course. It replaces, at the moment, for example, they've got a diesel-powered boiler, so now they're able to reduce their cost on diesel, and of course, the CO2 emissions and everything associated with diesel. To run the boiler with the biogas, that helps to produce the dairy products. And this is saving, we estimate, something like $9,000 a year in electricity costs. So this is an example of how we can develop a circular economy approach. And we're very excited with this project. And we're hoping to see how we can scale this project in other places, in other regions in the Middle East and beyond. And to summarize, we like to say the following. Laguna is all about from waste to wealth, promoting and actualizing both the food, energy, water nexus and circularity. Thank you very much.
So our second speaker is Maureen Nabulime. She is a doctoral student at the University of Maryland's Department of Environmental Science and Technology, holds both a master's and bachelor's of science degree in agricultural engineering from Makerere University in Uganda. Her research passion lies in sustainable environmental systems, specifically converting solid waste into bioenergy through anaerobic digestion and conducting life cycle assessments for sustainability. Under the guidance of Professor Stephanie Lansing, Maureen's innovative work targets the transformation of waste into valuable resources tailored for the aviation sector. with a focus on sustainable aviation fuel to contribute to circular and sustainable economy. So her topic is biogas production of food waste from different sources and characterization within a biocircular economy framework. So I'd like to invite Maureen for her presentation.
So my work is about biogas production from food waste from different sources, looking at the characterizations within a biocircular economy. And my name, as mentioned, Maureen Nabulime. My advisor is Stefan Lansing, who just spoke previously. So looking at municipal solid waste generation, globally municipal solid waste is increasing and it's expected to be 2.4 billion in 2050. And looking at the United States alone, we see that the generation rate as per 2018 is around 292 million tons of waste being generated, which is an equivalent of around 4.9 pounds per person generating waste every day. And looking at all these wastes, we see that it's all taken up to the landfill, about 55.6% being taken to the landfill, with some recovery and some combustion being used for energy production. We also noticed that out of all this waste that is going to the landfill, over 80% is organic waste, which ends up in the landfill. And out of this organic waste, we see that it's almost food waste that is being wasted and it ends up in the landfill. But this food waste that is going to the landfill is produced using resources like water, using resources like energy, using resources like the power production and also land. And when it ends up in the landfill, it's making the landfill to be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. So we want to divert this organic waste from going into the landfill and basically using it to produce renewable energy using the process of anaerobic digestion. It's already been mentioned. It's basically converting organic waste using microbes into biogas, which is a renewable energy source, and also into an organic fertilizer, which is basically a fertilizer which is nutrient rich and can be used for growing crops in different forms. While the biogas can be used for different purposes, including heating, transport, and also cooking and other purposes. So what I looked at in this work, I basically I wanted to determine the composition of municipal solid waste from different generating sources. And these generating sources are basically the landfill, the restaurant, the grocery, and the school. I wanted to determine the physicochemical characteristics of this organic fraction that is found within these sources, and also assess the biogas production differences among the generating sources. And so what we basically do, we went to these different sources, the restaurant, grocery, landfill, and the schools, get their trash basically, and then separate it into 27 categories. And these 27 categories were subdivided further into 3 major categories, with the major one being high moisture, which is mainly food waste and yard waste, followed by low moisture. These are more or less like combustible materials, including paper, wet contaminated fibers, textile, plastics, which are basically light film plastics, and also styrofoam. And then we have the recyclables, which would basically be recycled, but they end up into the trash, such as the textiles, the high density plastics, the polyethylene plastics, and other cardboards. And then the inorganic waste is basically what should be landfilled, because it has no recoverable value, but it would also be recycled at some scale. And then we pick the organic waste, which is basically food waste and yard waste. We conduct a biochemical methane potential using basically reactors, which are 250 milliliters in capacity. And then we run an experiment, which normally lasts for around 30 days until the biomethane potential is less than 1% of the cumulative. and then we end the experiment. So during this experiment, we are basically assessing the biogas production rate. We are also looking at the biogas composition to ascertain how much biogas is produced from each of these organic wastes. So looking at my results, we see that generally the municipal solid waste is organic in nature, and it's basically consisting of food waste. About 30.9% is food waste, followed by paper, and also followed by plastics. And looking at these components, they are basically distributed into energy recovery technologies, where food waste can be taken to anaerobic digestion. The paper and the plastics can be taken into another technology, which can be gasification. And so looking at the compositions along the sources that we checked, we see that the grocery store is having a lot of food waste. Almost over 80% is food waste. And this makes sense because in the grocery, food is being wasted as a result of like label expiry dates, slight damages on the food, and it's all not supposed to be taken by the people, so it turns out to be food waste. On the other hand, we see that the restaurant also has a high percentage of food waste, and this could be as a result of meal preparations, or it could be it's mainly consisting of the pre and post-consumer food waste, where it's as a result of before it gets onto the person's plate and within the kitchen itself, where food is also wasted. On the other hand, we see that the school has more of the paper, which is defined as the low moisture, followed by the landfill. Something to also note here is that when we looked at the landfill itself alone, it has a diverse composition of this waste. But it's also interesting that there was a lot of yard waste going into the landfill, and it's contributing to the high moisture waste. So we picked the food waste alone from each of these sources and categorized this food waste into the 13 major components based on the EPA waste reduction model. We wanted to understand how much of this food waste is which one, is fruits, vegetables, is milk, and so on. And so we found out that the food waste mainly consists of fruits and vegetables, mainly along all sources. But we also see that there is a mix of food, mainly in schools, where we have food mixed up without having meat. And we also found that in the schools still, there is a lot of liquids, which are mainly like milk. And so we see that these are potential sources of feedstocks for anaerobic digestion. And so we characterize these organic feedstocks to understand what would be the driving factors for them to be used as anaerobic digestion. And we see that the VS content of the food waste is basically high. The TS is high, the COD is high, and the pH is low, which means that it's acidic. And so whichever feed inoculum that you want to use should be really able to adjust the pH to the required range of 6.5 to 7 for microbes to be able to break down the food. So we also see that when we conducted anaerobic digestion of this food waste, we see that we can have biogas production within the first 4-5 days. And so we mean that food waste is highly biodegradable, and we can recover energy as fast as possible, which we can use for different purposes. And then looking at each of these different sources, we see that biogas production along the food bank, the restaurant, and the school is really high, because these are like consistent production sources. However, when we get to the landfill, it's kind of varying. Reason being that at some point there is, like, for example, in the summer, there is a lot of yard waste being taken into the landfill. And when it comes to winter, the yard waste reduces. And we are looking at yard waste and food waste. When these are combined, we see that there is going to be a reduction in energy production because the yard waste is highly lignin, and so it will reduce the production. So my conclusion, we see municipal solid waste is highly organic with 30.9% food waste, and food waste has high production rate for methane production, which is basically biogas. And we see that for us to use this food waste, there is need to incentivize collection at each of these sources and divert it from going to the landfill so that we can be able to capture the energy from it and reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the landfill. I want to thank my funders, the Department of Energy, and other collaborators, as shown on the screen. Thank you.
So today I'm going to talk to you about the opportunities and barriers associated with agrivoltaics in Maryland and with Nexus. First, I want to acknowledge that I work with some really awesome people. Our lab is led by Mitch, who's back here, back of the room. And we also have a great undergraduate student that's working with us. We have great, generous funders, including the Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection. Unfortunately, it's true that solar and agriculture go head to head. And solar is a threat to farmland and to farmers. But I'm here to tell you that it doesn't have to be either or. There are solutions to that land conflict, and it can come from agrivoltaics, which is the co-location of agricultural practices with the generation of solar energy power. Research has shown time and time again that there are benefits, mutual benefits across the food, energy, water nexus. Some of that research is mostly coming out of arid environments, and the few benefits can include reduced water usage. That's because under the shade of solar panels, plants transpire less, so less water is needed for irrigation purposes. And because there's less stress for the plants, for certain species, there are higher yields. And the cooler environment underneath the solar panel helps improve the efficiency of the solar panels themselves. And there's evidence that it could even extend the life expectancy of solar panels. So I don't think you get more few than that. Because of these benefits, agrivoltaics is expanding rapidly. And in fact, it's being adopted by industry faster than research can keep up with it. Agrivoltaics was first conceptualized in the 1980s. That happened in Germany. The first documented prototype occurred in Japan in 2004. By 2011, we saw the first official documented research study that was in France. And as of 2019, the United States had their first study, which was conducted in Arizona with Mitch and his colleagues. He brought his expertise to Maryland, and last year, he and I conducted the first Maryland agrivoltaic research study. Since Mitch's study in 2019, you can see that the amount of peer-reviewed literature has expanded rapidly. It's transitioned from looking at the design and engineering aspects of agrivoltaics to now looking more at the agronomic benefits and effects, and even now taking into what we're doing some of the social dynamics associated with the green technology. And as I said, right now, adoption in the commercial sector is outpacing research. And because of that, different types of agricultural activities are being folded into the definition of agrivoltaics. And that can include grazing and raising livestock with solar panels, but it can also include the use of semi-transparent cells on greenhouse roofs and siding. And even practices that are associated with agriculture that can be good for agriculture, like pollinator habitat, if it's done in conjunction with solar panels, some people are calling that agrivoltaics. So to track the spread of agrivoltaics in the United States, the Department of Energy is funding the INSPIRE project. I downloaded this picture yesterday. This shows you that as of yesterday, there are almost 600 agrivoltaic sites in the United States. And you can see from this picture that there seems to be geospatial differences in how the technology is evolving in the United States. So for instance, in the upper Midwest, we're seeing more of that pollinator habitat versus on the coast where we're seeing agrivoltaics being taking the form of grazing habitat. Now, Maryland has very aggressive renewable energy goals. Officially, we're trying to get to 50% by 2030. Unofficially, the governor has declared that we want to be 100% renewable by 2035. And to meet that goal, we need to have about 14.5% of our renewable energy come from solar. We are known in Maryland as being a leader in farmland protection. So we are the first in many aspects. We were the first to implement property tax relief programs to protect farmland. We were the first to authorize agricultural conservation easements, and recently we're the first to pass legislation that helps new generations of farmers acquire farmland. And so given those two things, this seems like a place where agrivoltaics really can meet our priorities and challenges. And so the question for us is, how? And to answer that question, we need systems-based interdisciplinary learning that produces research to action plans. So that's where our lab comes in. It specializes in looking at how humans interact with different systems and affect the outcomes. Our research initially is focusing on a very local level here in Montgomery County. So the county is roughly 475 square miles and about 1 million people live there. So that should tell you that the development pressure here is very, very high. Although we're not really known for being a major agricultural producer, it's something that is very important to people that live within the county. So much so that 1/3 of the county is protected in what we call the agricultural reserve, which limits development. So we need to know how agrivoltaics is going to evolve, and that means we really need to look at how the people are going to apply it and what is important to them. So we've deployed a participatory research approach, and we determined that the constituents that we are stakeholders that we should focus on are the farmers, community advocates, the solar developers, and then the government officials who are producing policy that affect how agrivoltaics will be adopted. In Montgomery County, our research approach first was to deploy a visual survey with the goal of identifying what does agrivoltaics mean to the people of Montgomery County. And then we also went into very in-depth conversations through focus groups with our stakeholder groups, and that the goal of that was to determine the perceptions, attitudes, obstacles, and barriers for adoption in Montgomery County. From our work, we learned that here in Montgomery County, our stakeholders are very well informed. They are familiar with the term agrivoltaics. And we learned that nearly 70% of the participants who took part in our research had a positive view, so that's great. Now, in terms of this visual survey, what we did was, it was online. We showed participants pictures of different types of agricultural activity that is occurring amongst some type of solar array arrangement. And what we learned was that interpretations of agrivoltaics really vary based on what occupied the land. So in Montgomery County, we can say with relative surety that stakeholders here accept crops and grazers as an acceptable agrivoltaic activity. But on the other hand, when they were shown pictures of pollinator habitat or beekeeping activities, they did not consider that agrivoltaics. And we also learned that whether people recognize systems really depends on whether the agricultural activity is obvious or not. So these two pictures come from the same agrivoltaic farm, and you can see that people recognize the agrivoltaic system to 90% when they saw the sheep. But when they were absent, only 16% recognized that as an agrivoltaic system. So that tells us that our extension, our educators need to get out and really help people understand what these systems are going to look like in order to increase acceptance. Now, despite the fact that nearly 70% of our stakeholders had a positive view of agrivoltaics, the majority of our focus group conversations focused on the barriers. And so some of the barriers that need to be solved at a higher level than the local level are access to transmission lines, and then zoning and permitting obstacles, which were addressed in this year's legislative session. But equally important, if not more, is the lack of local knowledge. People here do not have access to a site. They can't get onto a site and learn about it, and that's really important. And also, because we don't have these local sites, we don't have research. That's important because it's hard to convince farmers to sign a 30-year contract when they don't know what the implications are going to be locally. There's also a perception that there will be unfair economic consequences, and that's because landowners and farmers here are being paid up to $4,000 per acre per month for these solar contracts, and they will make more money doing that than they will selling their agricultural goods. So for the 60% of farmers who rent land here, there's a fear that they will not be able to find land to farm. And then the social acceptances that Dr. Lansing talked about earlier in Montgomery County are real and very, very aggressive. So people like the pastoral landscape, the look and the feel of the agricultural reserve, and they don't want that to change. Okay, the benefits that we should concentrate on here as researchers and policymakers are that our people here, while they're excited about the potential agronomic and environmental effects, what they're really excited about are the economic stability that these contracts can provide farmers, which can also, for the purposes of a generation, secure land tenure. That's great. Also, because we're a progressive state, people really care about the fact that agrivoltaics can produce clean energy. And also something that was surprising to learn was that the constituents here view agrivoltaics as a way to diversify our food crops, because we will transition from maybe the commodity crops that dominate Montgomery County to other types of practices where we're bringing in grazers and we're bringing in the food crops. The next step for us is that we're going to conduct this research on a statewide basis. We'll determine if the perceptions, obstacles, barriers, so on and so forth that we identified in Montgomery County hold across the state. We'll gather more specific information from farmers and ask them, what are your research desires, so that we know where to tailor our efforts. And with that, hopefully come up with research to action, community-driven, capacity building, experiential learning. Hopefully that will come in the form of the Maryland Agrivoltaic Research and Extension Consortium, which will include demonstration sites that are run by Extension, but also we're working to partner with solar developers so that we can expand the types of access that our stakeholders have access to, and we can do it on a more immediate basis. Again, thank you for having me, and please reach out to me if you have questions about agrivoltaics.
Our both speakers are Amanda, Josephine, and Isabella. So the work, they are working on the magnetic harvesting of algae for subsequent biofuels production that Amanda, Josephine, and Isabella will be describing. That represents the work of Wood College Plaza Bloom team, which is part of Department of Energy funded algae prize competition. Wood College Center for Coastal and Watershed Studies strives to connect students with coastal environments, research important issues, and provides local opportunities to make the positive change. So I'd like to welcome three ladies to present on harvesting microalgae with magnetotactic bacteria from Wood College faculty. Please.
So my name is Josephine, and I am here with Amanda and Bella, and we are going to be together presenting our research on the use of magnetotactic bacteria in harvesting microalgae. So just a quick overview of what we will cover in our presentation. We're going to talk about the background of our research, our foundational experiments, optimizing the conditions of our experiments, our result images, and conclusions, impacts, and acknowledgements. So as you all know, a major issue we are facing as a society is climate change, which is amplified by the burning of fossil fuels like coal and oil, which just adds more carbon dioxide into the system. And carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, which can trap heat in the atmosphere, further creating climate change. So what are the alternatives to fossil fuels? Some people have turned to electric vehicles as a solution, and while they seem like a good idea on the surface, when you look a little deeper, there are some major issues. It takes a lot of energy to power the charging stations necessary, and the energy that is produced is by burning coal or natural gases, which just adds more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. They are also very tricky to make widespread and accessible, and it would require a massive investment in more power plants, transmission lines, and charging stations. Making electric transportation standard would just inconvenience everyone's wallets at the dealership when you need to go buy a new car. And also the battery that we currently have is too heavy to support aviation and long distance shipping, because unfortunately there are no charging stations in the middle of the ocean.
So biofuels have proven themselves as reliable alternatives to fossil fuels and do not come with the disadvantages of other alternatives, such as electric vehicles. Biofuels are renewable, and while they produce carbon dioxide, it's not coming from fixed carbon, it's actually coming from biogenic carbon, which is carbon being recycled within the atmosphere. Another positive is that biofuels are a drop-in fuel. They can readily replace petroleum-based fuels, requiring no changes, additions, or extensive spending to existing infrastructure, which is essential when convincing people to change their fuel resource. A great example of biofuels is algae, which poses many benefits. It's easy to grow, it has high yields, and is space efficient, making it great for small harvesting locations. It's autotrophic, so it will recapture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It can grow in marginal spaces. It is oleaginous, and so lipids can readily convert to diesel. And there are many diverse algae species to derive biofuels from. Using microalgae for biofuel production does have a few problems. Our research is focused on the harvesting stage of the process, which typically makes up to 20 to 30% of total cost of production. So the cost is a consequence of energy usage, consumable materials, and equipment. And so finding a way to reduce this cost would help make biofuels a viable alternative to petroleum-based fuels. So we propose a novel way to accomplish this. Our team aims to improve microalgae harvesting, combining the low cost and high recovery of bioflocculation and the speed of magnetic capture techniques using magnetotactic bacteria. Under the right oxygen conditions, magnetotactic bacteria can produce their own magnets, allowing them to replace the expensive synthetic nanomagnets used in magnetic capture. And because the bacteria are organic, they can be processed alongside the algae.
So the first step in our research was to conduct our foundational experiments to ensure that the required interactions actually occurred. And those required interactions are, can the magnets collect bacteria, and do the bacteria and algae actually interact? And in these experiments, we focused on using the microalgae syndesmus and the cyanobacteria microcystis, and the bacteria's MSR1 and AMB1 because they were the most effective. Oh, and here is a video.
Oh, no, you're good.
Okay, here's a video of the bacteria, as you can see. And so what we're looking at here is the bacteria MSR1 alone. And our first test was to see if the magnets can collect the bacteria. And as you can see here, I'll just scream. So in these pictures is 10 minutes on the magnet, and there's a little bit of bacteria collected on the sides of the tube. But in these pictures, this is 1 hour on the magnet, and as you can see, there's a lot more bacteria collected on the sides. So we can see that the magnets actually work and interact with the bacteria. Thank you. And our second test was to see if the bacteria interacts with the algae, so we can collect them with the magnet. Thank you. So in these test tubes, the first one here and the third one over there just has algae in them. And in the second and the fourth test tubes, it has bacteria with algae. And as you can see, there's algae collected on the side of the test tubes after they've been set on magnets. So we can see that the bacteria and algae are interacting. And in these test tubes, in test tube C, you can see that the algae is much more concentrated, and that is after magnetic capture and resuspension. It was also important to find out what the bacteria can interact with, and unfortunately, not all of the organisms we tested showed an interaction. However, the microalgae syndesmus and cyanobacteria microcystis were magnetically collected, and the bacteria MSR1 was collecting the algae most efficiently, so we used that for all of our further experiments.
So now that we know what worked, we aimed to improve the conditions of magnetic capture by looking at factors such as pH, salt dependence, heat killed versus alive bacteria, and the kinetics of the magnetic capture. So our first experiment was with pH dependence, and as you can see, the microcystis was captured best at neutral pHs around 6, 7, and 8, while the syndesmus samples were captured more efficiently at lower pHs around 3 and 4. And then we took this information and used it as a control in the rest of our experiments. So we then took a look at salt concentration, and again, we found a difference between the microcystis and syndesmus. The microcystis did exhibit salt dependence, with the highest concentration of salt reaching around 65%, compared to our control and the other 3 that we tested, while syndesmus did not seem to have any changes with the salt concentration, with all 4 of the experimental values reaching around 95% binding. So because of the oxygen requirements for the magnetotactic bacteria, we felt it was important to test if dead or alive bacteria had any impact on the capture of the algae. And to do this, we used heat-killed and live samples of our MSR1 bacteria. And as we can see, the syndesmus showed really no difference between the 2, with both of the heat-killed and live reaching 95%. But because of the high capture rate of the syndesmus in our previous experiments, we believe that any difference could have been overshadowed. However, the microcystis was captured more efficiently with the dead bacteria. And while we need to conduct more research into why this might be, our current hypothesis is that the heat-killed bacteria are stickier than the live ones, which would result in those higher yields.
We next tested the impact of length of time that the mixture spent on the magnet. In these figures, the red line is our control containing just the algae, and the blue is the experiment containing MSR1 and the magnetotactic bacteria and the algae. And so, as seen in our figures, microcystis capture was extremely slow. So it took about 180 minutes to get to only 60% capture of algae, whereas with syndesmus, the capture was much more promising, with a half-life of cells remaining in suspension at 6 minutes, and after even just like an hour, or even after 30 minutes, sorry, after 10 minutes, we're close to 100% capture. Then we can see in these images how syndesmus is rapidly captured. We tested it again by pouring it onto a rocking magnet. And so in our figures, you can see from 30-second pour at the top center that you're starting to see the green algae being collected around the circular part of, edge of the magnet. And at 1 minute post pour, it's getting greener. And by 6 minutes post pour, you see almost pretty much 100% capture. And on the outer edge, this also showed us how the geometry of our test structure will have an impact on the algae and its speed, as well as the magnet strength and the space between the edge of the dish and magnet has impacted the algae. So we further looked at, we'll look at magnetic strength and distance the flux start from the magnet in the future.
So now what can we conclude from this experiment? We have shown that it is possible to use magnetotactic bacteria to bioflocculate some kinds of microalgae and cyanobacteria, and that we can use magnets to harvest algae from suspension. It is also worth noting that we have achieved 95+% harvest of syndesmus using MSR1, and we hope that our results can justify further research into this novel method of microalgal harvesting and dewatering. And to talk a little bit about the impacts of our work, we have shown that it is very efficient to use magnetotactic bacteria to flocculate and collect algae in comparison to other popular techniques like synthesized magnetic nanoparticles, which can be very expensive, and our technique allows for unlimited growth, which makes it a more commercially viable third-generation biofuel solution to our power problems.
We hope to further our research by expanding the number of cyanobacteria and microalgae species that we screened for interaction with the magnetotactic bacteria. As we were limited on time and also availability, there are many out there. And for our experiments, we used small, inexpensive neodymium magnets with a relatively weak pulling power. So examining how a stronger magnet might impact the speed and efficiency of the magnetic capture would be something we hope to look at in the future. We also believe that our results are very promising to the future of the algal harvesting production, and hope to compile a manuscript with our research to publish in a peer-reviewed journal sometime in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thank you both college faculties for this wonderful presentation. So our last speaker is Dr. Eric Wachsman. So introducing Dr. Wachsman is the director of Maryland Energy Innovation Institute, the William French Senatorial Chair in Energy Research, and a distinguished university professor with dual appointments in the Department of Material Science and Engineering and the Department of Chemical Engineering at the University of Maryland. So he's an expert on solid state batteries and solid oxide fuel cells. So Dr. Wachsman will be presenting on the energy water nexus. Welcome, Dr. Wachsman.
Thank you. The pleasure to see you all gathered here on this important topic. I'm going to focus more on the energy water side because obviously I'm an energy institute. This is a figure back from 2006. It's a Department of Energy figure that talks about the energy water nexus. And this indicates how long ago the importance of this was recognized. And you can see the various different things, right? Energy is used for pumping water, but then, you know, the power produces CO2, which then changes the climate and then takes water out of the streams, et cetera. And so they're all integrated in our lifestyle as far as the way that we make and consume energy and water, okay? And I'm going to admit freely that these slides are something I put together a decade ago, okay? And because of that importance, I led a symposium series at Electrochemical Society on the energy water nexus for a series of years. I submitted an NSF Engineering Research Center proposal led by the University of Maryland on the energy water nexus using this information. Unfortunately, at the time, NSF felt, well, this is really energy, so Department of Energy should fund it, not NSF. And the next year, they came out with a program called INFUSE, which was the Integrated Food, Energy, Water Systems, immediately after I submitted this proposal. Anyway, so let me get into it in a little bit more detail, right? So water treatment is a major consumer of energy, okay? U.S. water infrastructure consumes 4% of electric power generation for pumping, purification, and wastewater treatment. Significant energy savings, it could be obtained if wastewater could be used, right? Because basically what they're doing is they're taking fresh water from clean rivers and lakes. So they're pumping it all the way to your house. You then flush your toilet and then it goes into sewer and then it's got to be treated and goes back. Why can't we use some of that wastewater? Okay. And this is going to increase as water scarcity and population growth continues. Increasing reliance on non-traditional sources, brackish water, desalinated seawater, will demand even more energy because it's not as clean. So you have to go through a variety of more processes to deal with it. So this is sort of the energy or where we use our water, right? And the direct use is the stuff we actually use in our house. So when you are cooking, when you're taking a bath, that's the small one. The larger one, most one is for food. It's the indirect use because that's the water for irrigation, irrigation and growing your crops. But the one that's just about the same size is the amount of water that's consumed for electric power generation. So we normally don't think about that, right? You think about, you know, the stuff you're using in your house, and you may realize that your irrigation is going to be required for growing plants, but just as much almost goes for electric power generation. And this is just another figure showing that. These are the various different sources of it. Thermal electric power generation is the way we make most of our electricity. And it's comparable to that's being used for irrigation. Okay. So this is thermal electric water withdrawal, right? This is how much is coming. So 136 billion gallons per day of fresh water withdrawal. And 59 billion gallons a day of saltwater withdrawal for those electric power plants. And then this is the consumption. And consumption is not the same thing as withdrawal, right? Consumption is actually how much gets used. Withdrawal is how much you take out. But in many power plants, they then put it back. And this is kind of shown in this figure here. So prior to 1970, this is the way that electric power was generated. Basically, the consumption, you withdraw water, it goes through a loop, a condenser that's used for a turbine to produce electricity. And then more recently, they've gone to these types of power plants where now consumption is comparable to withdrawal, because in this case, you're producing steam and the steam is coming up and it's not going back into the river. We need alternative cooling technologies or wind and PV generation if we're going to avoid that much water consumption for producing our electricity needs. The other is fuel production, right? So that was electric power, but obviously we're powering our automobiles and things like that. And this is one of the negatives that it comes about, is that there are unavoidably, maybe there should be avoidably, but unfortunately, maybe a better word, oil spills that come out of this, okay? And has a direct impact on water availability, right? You can't use that water when it's contaminated like that. And unfortunately, it has a very negative effect on the wildlife. One of the things that's being pursued now is what they call unconventional, right? So that was drilling, let's say, in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm going to call it the Gulf of Mexico intentionally, by the way. This is oil sands, and this is the Alberta oil sands. It's a high viscosity oil sand mix. And what they do is they get this tar sand and they heat it up to get the oil to be less viscous so they can separate it out. But to do that, they're burning natural gas to get the heat. And typically it has to be sited near a river due to the water use. 400 million gallons a day by 2030 is projected. And oil sands is probably then one of the worst sources of those types of hydrocarbon fuels because of, one, all the energy that goes into it, the corresponding CO2, the impact on water, et cetera. And you might have heard a while back something called the Keystone Pipeline. That's the oil that they want to bring down to the United States, was the Keystone Pipeline, because if that was implemented, then that oil would come down from Alberta into the refineries in the Gulf of Mexico. The other one is fracking. Fracking is the way we're getting most of natural gas right now, right? And so this is a schematic showing how fracking is done. And obviously there's concerns about potential contamination of the aquifer, because you're going way deep below the aquifer. You're getting that hydrocarbon process out, okay? But you're using a lot of water to do that. And by the way, this is the source of energy from shale, is where I got this thing. And they're talking about the billions of gallons of water that's got to be done to do the fracking process itself. So obviously biofuels is a topic I think a lot of people are interested in, but growing those biofuels, we're not picking on algae because you're doing it in water, requires a lot of water to do that. And these are just different biofuels, and the amount of water that is consumed in growing these various different crops. Corn ethanol or soy biodiesel requires 1,000 times more water per gallon for fuel for irrigation than for the refining. Irrigation is already 40% of U.S. water withdrawal and would increase dramatically if we replace petroleum with biofuel. So this is a comparison about fuel production, and the reference there is refining of oil. That's how much water is used in it. And so if we went to some of these biofuels, for example, this is ethanol and biodiesel refining of soy, the water consumption is not that bad, but the issue is the irrigation part of it, okay? So all of these things have to be thought of on a system basis, not individually. Okay, I can grow this crop and it doesn't take much water or power to produce the fuel, but the life cycle involves a lot of water that's got to be removed, and it has to come from someplace. This, on the other hand, is the amount of water from enhanced oil recovery. That was that fracking type of stuff that I talked about. So it's not necessarily good either, right? But the thing is, if we could do it from electricity, photovoltaics, wind, solar fuel, the amount of water consumed would be much less. So U.S. water withdrawal is unsustainable. This shows a map of the United States, and you'll find that where the withdrawal is relative to precipitation, okay, where it's bad is in the red, and where it's relatively good is in the green. And the greatest water shortages are in the regions of highest population growth. For whatever reason, people want to live in the areas that are dry and hot, and then they want to use more water and they want more electricity. So, well, that's great, but then it's just not sustainable, because where's that water going to come from, and where's electricity going to come from? If you're down in sort of the south area, they have areas where, in fact, really, really hot in the summer, they want to crank on the air conditioning. But they can't, because the power plant is in a brownout, because there's not enough water in the stream for the cooling loop for electric power generation. They have major brownouts, for example, in Texas and things like that. And so the energy water nexus really, and this ties it back to the food thing, is more of a trifecta, all right? The projected climate change is then the additional aspect of this. And you can see that basically as we use more energy, there's less precipitation, glaciers are reduced, you know, all of these things impact them through the connection through climate change. As we produce more or we consume more electricity, we produce more CO2 in the atmosphere, and therefore we have changes in climate, and therefore there's less water available, and it just snowballs. Maybe it doesn't snowball because there's no snowballs anymore. All right. And so the other aspect of it is the water availability directly impacts the developing world. Those of us living in the advanced world, we consume all these things, but where the biggest negative impacts are in the developing world, okay? And that is impacting food availability, which then ties back to the food aspect of it. Where are we going to get water from? Well, one of the things that, you know, we consume all of the stuff that's available in streams and lakes and like that, it's desalination. But that is the most energy intensive way of water purification. So how can we do it better? So now I'll come into some of the research that we're doing. And this is cogeneration of power and potable water. So in this case, as mentioned, I do a lot of work on solid oxide fuel cells. Solid oxide fuel cells are a way of producing electricity from a fuel. It can be hydrogen, but it can also be a hydrocarbon. And in this particular case, anaerobic digestion gas. I had some collaborations with Stephanie at one point, okay? And so we can take that as a feed, and then we produce electricity. But the other aspect of it is that this is the reaction. So for all electricity that's formed, we're also producing pure water on one side. And we're also producing heat. It's got 50% efficiency. That means 50% of the energy goes into heat. If I take that heat now and I put it into the desalination, I actually improve the efficiency of the membrane separation for purification of water. And so this is some work we did. It was funded through Electrochemical Society, through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where the idea was, can we provide a way of dealing with sanitation in the developing world, take those waste streams and co-produce electricity and water. And if you look at the graph there, the lower blue line is the water that's produced just by the exhaust from the fuel cell. But then you add to it the blue that we come from desalination because we take the heat and we improve the efficiency of that. And so the total amount of water is sufficient for supplying the daily drinking water for 70 people and the electric power consumption for 100 people. The idea being that this is something that can be deployed in the developing world. And then the last one is not something that I do, but something that we at University of Maryland should be very proud of. And that's Watershed. This was the 2011 Solar Decathlon champion. It was the very first time in the Solar Decathlon program where somebody brought together both energy efficiency and water efficiency. And if you were to look at the house, which by the way is on permanent display at BG&E in Montgomery County, it has a solar roof and it has a water roof, and it has all kinds of technologies inside where they have more efficient, for example, dehumidification and other technologies that reduce both energy and water consumption. So I know I'm out of time, and my basic conclusions are they're critical, they're inextricably linked, and we really need to look at integrated systems approach for all of these things. Thank you.